Who was Mark Dean, and how did he help build the modern PC? My answer is simple. He was one of the engineers who helped turn the personal computer from a machine with limited expansion into a platform that could actually grow, connect, and become useful at scale. That matters more than it sounds, because the modern PC was not built by one genius in one room. It was built by a chain of technical decisions, and Mark Dean helped shape one of the most important ones. I'm going to show you exactly which part he changed, why that part mattered, and why his legacy is bigger than a single patent line on a resume. Dean was born in 1957 in Tennessee, and came of age in a period when computing was still an elite, heavily gated field. The world he entered was not friendly to black engineers, and it was not especially open to young people who wanted to work at the center of hardware design. That context matters, but I don't want to reduce his story to symbolism. What makes Dean historically important is that he entered IBM at a moment when the company was building the original IBM PC, and he did real engineering work on the architecture that made the machine practical for business users. In other words, he was not standing outside the machine as a commentator. He was inside the design process, helping define how the PC would work in the real world. The key to understanding Dean is to understand the problem IBM had to solve. Early PCs were not magical all-purpose computers. They were constrained boxes. If you wanted a printer, a modem, a graphics card, extra memory, or a network connection, the machine had to be able to accept expansion hardware without collapsing under its own complexity. That is where the bus architecture comes in. A bus is the communication pathway inside the computer. It is how the CPU talks to peripherals and expansion cards. If the bus is weak, slow, or too limited, the whole machine becomes a dead end. Dean's work helped shape the IBM PC's expansion architecture, including the original ISA bus and related design choices that made the machine modular instead of fixed. That sounds technical because it is, but it is also the difference between a computer as a single product and a computer as a platform. Here is the part people often miss. The modern PC was not just about raw speed. It was about compatibility and extensibility. A machine becomes a standard when other companies can build around it, not just inside it. Dean's contribution helped make the IBM PC easier to expand, which in turn made it easier for the market to adopt third-party hardware and software around a common architecture. That is a huge historical lever. Once a computer can accept standardized expansion cards and peripherals, you get an ecosystem. And once you get an ecosystem, the machine stops being a one-off device and starts becoming an industry template. Dean's name is also tied to a famous milestone. He was part of the IBM team that worked on the original IBM PC, and later on the development of the ISA bus, with one of his most cited achievements being the co-invention of the industry standard architecture that helped define expansion in early personal computers. The exact technical lineage can get messy because hardware development is collaborative, and patents do not always capture every contribution cleanly. But the historical point is solid. Dean helped create the connective tissue that let the PC become more than a keyboard, screen, and motherboard in a box. He helped make it a machine you could customize, upgrade, and deploy in offices at scale. That matters because business computing in the 1980s was all about standardization. Companies did not want a fragile novelty. They wanted a machine they could buy in volume, support in volume, and expand in volume. The IBM PC succeeded partly because it was open enough for a market of compatible components to form around it. Dean's work sits right in that story. If the bus architecture had been too restrictive, the PC might have remained a closed appliance. Instead, it became a modular system that could absorb new needs as they appeared. Printers, storage, networking, graphics, and specialized cards all depended on that basic idea. The computer should be able to grow with the user. And that is where the legacy gets sharper. When people talk about the modern PC, they often picture the CPU, the operating system, or the graphical interface. Those are visible, but the hidden infrastructure is what made the machine durable. Expansion slots and bus standards are not glamorous, yet they are what let the PC survive changing demands. Dean's contribution was not about making the computer look futuristic. It was about making it structurally adaptable. That is a very different kind of innovation. It is less visible, but often more decisive. Plenty of flashy products fail because they cannot evolve. The IBM PC succeeded because engineers like Dean helped build in room to move. There is also a broader historical judgment here. Mark Dean should be remembered not as a token first in a feel-good story, but as a serious hardware engineer whose work helped define a standard. He later became one of the most prominent black executives and engineers in computing, but the reason he deserves attention is not that he fit a diversity headline. It is that he helped solve a concrete technical problem at a moment when the personal computer was becoming the backbone of office life. That is the kind of contribution that changes markets. It affects what manufacturers can build, what software developers can assume, and what users can expect from a machine. Of course, there is a limit to how far any one person's credit should go. The IBM PC was a team effort, and the modern PC evolved through many layers of work by IBM and by the wider clone ecosystem that followed. Dean did not invent the entire personal computer, and he did not single-handedly create the PC industry. But that is not a weakness in the story. It is the point. Big technological shifts usually happen through infrastructure decisions that look small from a distance. A bus standard is not a headline-grabbing invention, yet it can shape decades of hardware design. If you want to understand why the PC became a universal machine instead of a dead-end product, you have to pay attention to that layer. Dean's later career reinforces that he was not just a one-project figure. He continued working in advanced computing and eventually held leadership roles at IBM, including work connected to high-performance systems. That matters because it shows a career arc, not a single lucky break. He moved from foundational PC architecture into broader computing leadership, which tells you something about the depth of his technical credibility. He was not remembered because he happened to be nearby when history happened. He was remembered because he kept operating at the level where computing history gets made. Architecture, systems, and scale. So if you came here asking who Mark Dean was, the clean answer is this. He was an IBM engineer whose work helped define the expansion architecture that made the personal computer flexible, compatible, and commercially durable. And if you came here asking how he helped build the modern PC, the answer is that he helped build the part most people never see, but always depend on. He helped make the PC expandable. That one design principle helped turn a single machine into a platform, and a platform into an industry standard. That is why his name belongs in the history of computing, not as decoration, but as part of the mechanism itself.